When I was in grad school, I had the amazing good fortune to work with Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown and Steve Eisenhower at Venturi Scott Brown Associates. And that same rigor and the same caliber of client existed in that office. But there was definitely this understanding that everybody in the office had a life and they had families. And whilst we worked sometimes long hours, Bob and Denise and Steve were always in the office with you. And when they wanted to go home, they let everybody else go home. And they knew your kids' names. They knew everything about your family. And it was a far more equitable, and I'll just say tolerant place. And that was very formative to me. And, you know, after I graduated at Penn and came to Chicago, I had a couple of jobs, but I tasted this caliber of these places, and I'd also, I guess, adopted this idea or this culture of having a life beyond architecture, beyond the architecture office. And so that was one of the impetuses for starting my own practice ultimately, so that I could be in control of that.
I see.
It's a multitude of things. It's about the way you draw and document projects, being very comprehensive, detailing things to the nth degree. It's about things like getting the best photographers to photograph your work so that you can share and promote that work afterwards. It's about marketing things. I think it's really about an excellence at every level, and it's about communication. It's about design. It's about your involvement and leadership in a community. And yeah, I would leave it at that. Surrounding yourself always with the very best people. Mm-hmm. I think those are good habits, and those are things that we insist on at Architecture is Fun to this day.
Okay. Thanks for sharing.
Mentors are critical.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really important, like, to go to these conferences and meet, like, people who can guide you in the right direction and play a mentorship role in your life.
Yeah, I think actually it's the reason to go to conferences at all. Obviously, there's some content, and there are these things that we like to do as architects. However, I would say that, you know, working with my partner, Sharon, with our clients, and making a real difference in the lives of people and their communities through the work we do. That's what's really gratifying, and that's what is particularly motivating. And it's hard to pull out a single client to that. You know, we work on a lot of different projects at a lot of different scales, but I always feel like a project is better for us having been there and having a relationship and enabling this client or community to build something of which they're proud and something that supports their mission. We are involved in our community, and we help our clients live better lives. The purpose of Architecture is Fun is to make everyday life more fun through architecture. And that's not a frivolous statement, but I think it has something to do with happiness, whether you're in school, whether you're in one of our civic or institutional museum projects, you know, if you're in a library that we've designed, that place is a provider of joy in your life. And if you're the person that we worked with, the client, that the experience was a source of pride and joy and of participation. And I guess at the end of the day, we call that fun, right?
Yeah.
The thing that we really need to get to grips with, I think, is how we're going to disrupt architecture. And I think that disruption is going to come about through how we tackle environmental stewardship. and how architects rise to the occasion of solving the critical challenges posed by climate change. And we're going to do that through evidence-based design. We're going to bring more data to our work. We are going to design very specific outcomes. And some of those outcomes, that will have something to do with happiness, but they'll also have something to do with building performance. They'll have something to do with the health of the people that are using the buildings and the communities in which they live. And rather than just sort of assuming that that will happen, we're going to have to embed tactics and data and strategies within our design process that will persuade and demonstrate to our clients that this is actually happening, that their buildings will be more affordable, that their buildings will use no energy, that the people within their buildings will test better in school, they'll get better quickly in healthcare, that they'll be more productive in that office. These are things that we need to come to grips with as architects and start presenting evidence-based solutions in all of our designs. And we must do that. We must disrupt our industry from within that way, or somebody else will do it for us.
Mm-hmm. One
of the reasons I think we got much of our early work was because of our connectivity and our networks beyond architecture. I used to participate in the City of Chicago's Sister Cities program. And the City of Chicago, I think, has a relationship with, I think, 32 international cities around the world. That number may not be right, but being part of that program was one way that introduced me to a global community of young, curious minds like myself, but also a network of global leaders and people involved in all kinds of fields across business and culture that were relevant to the City of Chicago. So I suppose, as an international, as an immigrant here myself, that is one of the things that I've always been aware of, and leveraging my global perspective through appropriate networks too. And I think that probably goes for everybody. Don't just hang out with, your own friends, and don't just hang out with a bunch of architects the whole time. You bring a great global perspective to a community, and people are interested in that. But you've got to go out there and talk about it and share it. It could be that, you're doing that through all kinds of volunteer organizations.
I see. Can you share some experience you had or advice you received that has a humbling and everlasting impact in your life?
When I went back to graduate school, I had 2 or 3 years of work experience. And compared to some of my colleagues, perhaps I thought I knew a little more than I did. And one of the things that I did in graduate school on my very first project was to do something very predictable. And it wasn't a particularly good solution. I thought it looked good, but my professor told me to look at it, and they just told me that it wasn't good. But I had not challenged myself, that I had not really looked at the problem. And for somebody that had worked in the places that I had, that was spectacularly humbling. I had not been modest, and I'd been overly confident about my project. And there are times where this happens in practice. You think you've understood the client, but you perhaps haven't listened as well as you should have. Or they gave you some signals in their feedback to you that you probably should have heard a little sooner or not been dismissive of. And professional situation, when you don't listen to those things, and particularly when you don't listen to them twice, the ramifications for your project and perhaps for your livelihood on that project, they start to evaporate really quickly. And it's hard to get back into a position of trust and to maintain that relationship once that's happened. So I think that awareness of criticism and to avoid complacency in the way you approach a project is something that I've taken from experiences like that. And to be a good listener and to be empathetic and understanding of what somebody's asking for are always very critical. That may seem obvious, but sometimes I think architects sometimes have a tendency to think that we know better. And it's possible that sometimes we have experiences that a client hasn't thought about, but we should also listen very carefully to what they believe they need and to respond appropriately to them. I think if you listen to the client and you respond in a way that helps them tell their story, and that you've demonstrated that you've listened and represented that in your solution, I think that you'll find that they're very trusting in allowing you to, for instance, decide what it will look like. And we know as designers there are many solutions to those problems. And so if we have grand design ideas or an approach that we like to take, as long as we've demonstrated first and foremost that we've listened, the client is going to trust you to determine the way in which you execute it and give you a great deal of freedom.
Mm-hmm.